Hi there, guys. Welcome to a special episode of the Grupo Sanzalo podcast. I have here my friend, Mestre Versátil. Thanks for joining.
Há tempo. Valeu. Good to see you.
Yeah, man. Thanks for joining in tonight. So today's episode, we want to talk about professionalism capoeira, seeing capoeira as an aspect of healthcare. We're going to talk about informed consent, code of conduct, upfront pricing, schedule information. We're also going to be talking about rank and hierarchy, saying that everything has limits, how we can respect knowledge and skill without creating idols. And to have the easy, hard conversation, it's easier to have a hard conversation up front than having a very almost impossible conversation afterwards. So welcome, Versátil. Thank you for joining in. And if you could just start with, like, we've been, this is the second episode that we've been approaching this issue, and I really think these are important, but I'd like to hear your mindset behind those topics that you decided to call it in.
Yeah, I think that again, this is part of a series because, like, as you've always said, these are conversations that just have to continue to happen. And if we have a number of them, then other people will have a number of them. And sometimes we're able to give our points of view, and other times we can sit back and watch and listen to other people's points of view, and that way we all get to educate one another. And that's why we get to sit here like this. And I think it's really a fairly simple thing when we look at how we define capoeira. Or how we talk about capoeira. Anytime you hear folks who've done capoeira for a long time, they talk about how capoeira saved their lives, how capoeira changes their lives. That capoeira is this microcosm in the roda, in the circle, that shows lessons that we need to learn and bring into our everyday lives. Capoeira salva vida, capoeira muda vida, all of these things that we say about capoeira. So I don't think it's necessarily anything new or controversial to really say that capoeira is an extremely powerful thing for the people who practice it. It allows us to grow and create communities where kids' lives are changed, street kids' lives are changed, adults in the West who are sitting up doing 9-to-5 jobs, our lives are changed. It's across the board, capoeira has an ability to change people's lives for the better. And because of that, and because of the ways that it works, I think that it's not difficult to argue that capoeira is healing. Capoeira is educational, right? It teaches us a lot of the street smarts, as well as the lessons that we learn from the histories of people who were colonized and people who fought for liberty. Capoeira is also psychodynamic, which is a word that we use in psychology, that just means that it affects us at a psychological level, and is able to make changes for us at a psychological level. So capoeira is all of these things: physical, mental, emotional, educational. And so it's empowering and it's liberating for those of us who really feel that change and have had those positive changes. But we also know that, especially with these issues that pop up every once in a while into the spotlight, but never really go away, that for some people, the experience of capoeira or the experience in the capoeira context has been disempowering, has been hurtful. And I think one of the ways that we can address that is just by looking at how we really idealize capoeira. And that is that everything that we attribute to capoeira is what we attribute to healthcare, to the ways that we benefit one another's lives, not necessarily within the confines of an industry. So, it's not like the way that the pharmaceutical industry or the medical industry necessarily provides healthcare, which is, you get sick and then they give you something to deal with sickness, but in a way that we're able to provide ongoing betterment, so that we don't get sick. But there has to be a certain balance there. There's certain things that we expect when we go to a doctor, when we go to a school, when we go to a psychiatrist or a psychologist, a therapist, when we go to a massage parlor, right, to get our backs worked on. There's certain types of etiquette and professionalism that we expect that, I don't think that we have been trained to expect that in capoeira, even though we say all of these other things about capoeira and how it's this powerful force that does all of these things. We don't take that next step to say, well, what does that mean as far as the responsibility of the practitioners, the teachers, the providers, to then have this level of professionalism. And this is a very culturally based traditional art form that we do, and so there's no way that we can say, well, these are the laws and these are the rules of things. But I do think that if we look at the culture that we live in, and try to match, even if you go to Africa, there are there's a huge amount of medical and spiritual knowledge that we gain there. And in those systems, even in Ifa, and other traditional systems, there is a responsibility for the care of those who come to receive healing or direction within those systems. So we can't also say that we have to let it be just an open playing field because it's a cultural art, right? There still has to be some kind of responsibility taken, some kind of level of professionalism that's applied there. And I think that's kind of the first place where I find myself when I start looking at capoeira and how we can better the experience for those who come to capoeira for whatever they come for. And not to say that the medical industry has really amazing outcomes either. There are certain medical procedures where the outcome of survivorship is 50-50, but it's still better than the disease by itself. But I'm sorry, what were you saying?
No, saying that capoeira, it's something that also is very, very much alive and evolving constantly. And I feel that in my short span of life, I've seen this transition of capoeira going from something that was really informal, and in a short space of time, in 40 years, how it's gradually becoming more and more professional. Professional in the sense that we have more and more people practicing it, more and more people making a living out of it, and also capoeira, I think, was in the US, correct if I'm wrong, but early 70s, right? And in some places early 80s. So is pretty much the same in Europe. And it is also this transition of something that is informal, and it gets just like in the roda. I like to really make this comparison of the roda, how each individual in the roda influence the outcome of how the roda is going to be, right? And by having folks from the US, folks from Europe, everywhere capoeira goes, capoeira absorbs that in and influence the how it happens. So I think there is there is a spirit of adjustments, like what is expected. And then, capoeira here now, say 40 years ago, capoeira was an event, would be a one-day thing where you would have, you just go and do a big roda, do the batizado, and then there'll be a table of fruits. And that was the capoeira event. And then gradually, capoeira coming abroad, it had this whole impact of, okay, people are making a living out of this, so we have to make it longer, few more days, and we're going to do a few more things. We're going to invite more people. So then, yeah, is that, and at the same time, Brazil is comparison, to Europe and the US, just laws that, if you're going to work with kids, for example, you got to have some. You need a background check. You need, there's a certain of training and some checks and that you need to do, and this is non-existent yet in Brazil. So I think is definitely the case of what is happening abroad that is starting to influence more and more, and it needs to, like you were saying, it needs, because those things need to be implemented in Brazil itself. And yeah.
I think it's interesting because you have the view, even just being the son of a maestri, so really you have at least two lifetimes of the view of that history, and I think it's important to recognize that capoeira is something that has been evolving and organizing in different ways. Even the creation of uniforms and court systems and even just school systems within capoeira is part of that evolution. So it's definitely not something that is foreign to capoeira to start looking at it in ways that better serve the present day, make it more continue the relevancy for it. And I think that that's the inability to take that step is why, or the fact that we still have yet to really take that next logical step is why we have had these issues come up. We don't have the checks and balances in place that we need, and yet they're a very logical next step. Like in medicine, in psychology and education, there, as you said, there's informed consent. And some of these things don't apply the same way in capoeira necessarily as they would in a medical office or in a school, but they still have ways that we can implement them, right? In capoeira. So informed consent, like you said, background checks, especially if someone is working with children. I think also the notion of providers as servants, which, even in the medical field, sometimes doctors forget that they're there to take care of the patient rather than to condescend or, act like they know what's best all the time. So you go to some schools, for instance, and you can visibly see the rank difference because of the way that teachers may behave. Always getting in the front of the roda, even if the other students haven't had a chance to play yet. Always taking the instruments, even if there are other qualified people who know to play the music. There are so many of these little aspects that we can put checks in. It's, to quote, was it Ben Parker from Spider-Man, right? With great power comes great responsibility. And I've seen amazingly orchestrated schools where the teachers, they may get that first game, but then after they get their game, they don't play other teachers anymore. They make sure to play students. They make sure to find students who haven't had a chance to play yet and make sure that they get their chance to play. And they're really spending their time making sure that other students are learning and that they have those opportunities, rather than, oh, there's all these teachers here who I haven't had a chance to play with, and so now we're just going to have all these teachers with teachers types of games. And so I think just that shift in mentality that's already happening is something that we need to be looking at across the board, because it's difficult for a student to come up to a teacher and say, hey, this is my turn, why are you cutting in front of me? And it shouldn't be their responsibility to make us accountable. It's our responsibility to hold ourselves accountable. So even if there's that game that we want to play, that we ask permission, and that if the student doesn't look like they want to give it, then oh, no, go ahead, it's all good, take your game. Even explaining to the students, because in the moment a student still might not want to say no, but explaining to the students that, yeah, if I want to cut in for a game, you don't have to let me. It's just me exercising an option to ask, but it's your final decision. Small things that in ongoing conversations with our students, let them know that they can just as easily hold us to accountability. If we can orchestrate that just in the way that we play in the Hada, just the way that we relate to one another in the Hada, that those lessons, because the Hada is a reflection of what happens in real life, those lessons then extend into how we act when it's not a class time, or how we act when we're at a party or what have you. So I think that is extremely important.
Yeah, I agree, and I like going back again to make this comparison, because it's important to put things in context of a timeline. How not long ago in Brazil, you had to prove to the mestre that you deserve to be taught of capoeira.
Yeah.
And here now you want to make capoeira accessible to everyone, so it's like that's a 180-degree mentality. Like from the stories, like Mestre Bimba say, oh, you want to do capoeira, let me see if you can hold on the choke here. Like there was those stories and stuff. Of course he didn't do that, like but just this idea that you need to do it, and I really find that it is me as a person who is teaching capoeira abroad and who makes a living out of this, and you want to keep it truthful to capoeira. I really find this important, to keep it truthful to capoeira and try to show what capoeira really is. But at the same time, you have to listen to the feedback that you have from your students, right? So you have to find, which is kind of on those topics that you wrote it down. I really found interesting this concept that is like, there is a hierarchy only makes sense if there is a reason behind it, right? And it should not be like a blank check. And I feel that this is super important to keep it clear. It's important. Like, you want your students to play in the Hada, but at the same time you have to pass on the idea that, look, now every Hada has their own rules, so it's important to watch and observe and introduce yourself before you go into another Hada. So there's a whole set of etiquette that it's important, because even the rules of how the game is played, it can change widely from group to group, from places to places in Brazil, but I also feel that you this idea of decolonizing this, because moving abroad and having to listen to the students, what they were saying, what they found was good, and what was, which battles you're gonna, pick, right? Like what are to be able to tell where do they have a real point in this, and where you think, no, look, this is here for a reason, and living abroad, it also made me realize how much of that kind of the culture of, of how tough and like just leftovers of this culture of slavery, because Brazil was, one of the last countries to abolish slavery, and we tell ourselves that, oh, Brazil is this wonderful place and stuff, but I'm not by no means, that's how it is. There are really amazing stuff in Brazil, but there is really cruel stuff, and there are habits that are still strong in our society, and capoeira being part of, coming from the Brazilian society also has. And sometimes it takes you from being outside that kind of sphere of influence to see things different, like exactly like this. Sometimes the abuse of the authority and how that can be pushed, and I feel that it is a fine line to, you got to tell the students, look, there is a reason why this guy is a master, but this stops when the class stops. And outside that, you, like we say in Brazil, you don't have to swallow frog for no one, swallow a frog for no one. Engolir sapo, but yeah, it's this is what I feel that is important as well to point out when you making this dialogue between your students and preparing them for as they get more advanced and they start going to other places, and
Yeah, I think really that, and for me especially, because I am basically an American practitioner of capoeira who's learned from Brazilian mestres, and know that in any movement we replicate our oppression within the movements, even though these movements are what allows us to overthrow our oppression in many ways. And so there's this struggle that mestres have and the teachers have to decolonize themselves or to look into themselves. I remember hearing so many stories about how many mestres had, some mestres had students, but other mestres had disciples, right? And that was almost an ideal, that, you were there like Jesus with your 13 disciples, following your every word, going from class to dinner to samba to a roda, and just hanging on every word as though a person was a prophet or something. And it's definitely time to recognize that there are limits. I mean, if I'm in a class, I'm going to listen to the master to find out how to throw a martelo in the best way within the circumstances of how that group's style is, right? And understanding that mestre has a last word with regards to that. If I go to a different school, a different mestre will tell me something different, but I'm going to be listening to what that mestre said because I'm in that space. And I think that type of understanding is where we understand where that power differential makes sense, who has the last words within the teaching of that tradition. But as soon as we leave the class, as soon as we're out to lunch after the class, even though the mestre is there, the mestre goes from being, Shango do whoever to being Julio or whatever their name is, and I think that's one of the things, because I hear your students, for instance, at times they will call you by your first name, although your apellido seems to be your name, but in class they'll call you mestre, and outside they'll call you by your name. And I think that's an extremely healthy way of differentiating. And I'm sure that means that you at some point had to be like, oh no, that's okay. I'm Pedro. We're at the bar. We're drinking. We don't need to, you don't have to call me mestre here. We're having dinner together. You don't have to call me mestre here. I think that's a very healthy thing. In the class, I'm mestre. And I think understanding, and really again, it falls to us to draw those lines, so that folks aren't calling us mestre when we're all riding the bus together. I'm not messy. I got my bus token right here, just like you have your bus token. We're all, maybe you can help me carry my bag because I have a hurt shoulder, but that's not because I'm better than you or you have to grovel to me. It's because we help each other. So I think, yeah, that's a huge aspect of understanding the limits of hierarchy. And I think that something that you brought up in a previous discussion is that a lot of times when we talk about these things, we talk about them in a way that certain teachers or masters will hear it at first and be like, oh, you want to completely like eliminate the hierarchy? Well, then how am I going to be a teacher if nobody knows to listen to me as a teacher? And so we also have to be, I don't want to say careful, but compassionate in the way that we talk about these things, so that folks who have lived their lives in these arts also understand that these are not motives to disenfranchise them from their work, but these are ways that we can make their work more spacious and more accepting, and thus they have more students who are happy to be there with them. So it's a way that all of our work becomes better because there's more space for people. But I think that's a huge fear that, unless I completely remove all sense of the respect that a student should have for a teacher, then I won't be accepted within the community. And I don't think that's the case. And I think it's a bit of an unreasonable fear, but at the same time, sometimes the language that we use to talk about these things creates these fears. And I'm hoping that we can find ways to talk about these things with our masters, especially with the older ones, because in some cases they're the hardest ones to move. But at the same time, if they do move, then they will also bring a lot of folks with them. So I think these are important conversations that we can have with people like Mestre Gato or Mestre João Grande, Mestre Boa Gente, like these older mestres who are in our spaces and who are beloved to us, and who we want to know that there are changes afoot that don't mean that they are any less, but that there are ways to invite, to be more inviting, to create safer spaces where more students are going to want to be there for longer and are going to feel empowered to be part of the community and the situation.
Yeah, it's again like this balance when you mention like safe space, because it also depends on your understanding of how capoeira should be played, and also the understanding that there is, we're talking about capoeira that is played on terms that vary a lot, from group to group, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, how they deal with the martial arts side of it, and there is a lot of this culture as well from people that, the Brazilians teaching sometimes, oh, I lived through this, I experienced this, they have to experience this too. And like, really, like what do you want them to experience? What do you think is going to make them understand more, about capoeira, because to be a good capoeirista, you know what I mean? Like, and these were things that as I grew up and I had many, capoeira friends that, the master would be very protective of like where they go to play capoeira, for example. And there were times that there was a rivalry with other groups and we were not allowed to go and play, in those rodas. And I understand this up to a limit, because in the end of the day, if you pay capoeira, you pay for your classes, and like you're gonna let your master dictate where you go or where you don't go. Maybe there is a reason, maybe there isn't. You know what I mean? Like, so it's I think it's down to every individual, every capoeira player to make that call, because it is a fine line. Say, the example I like to do is like, oh, we would like to make a street roda, master. What do you think? I said, look, if you're gonna hold the street roda, you have to be able to hold your ground, because there is chance, and I feel like from the capoeira master, the capoeira teacher, that sometimes there is this insecurity of, oh, this is gonna happen, and then they're gonna take, they can take over. It's like, not really. Sometimes you need to, as we say in Brazil, sing, cantar a pedra. We have to sing what's gonna happen, sing the stone, meaning like what can happen, and say, look, if you do this, if you do a hot on the street, maybe there'll come another capoeira player that will be confrontational, and how are you going to deal with that, and sometimes the best thing is actually let them do it and then see, because once happens what you warned them that might happen, then actually they look up to you, even like you will earn the, I'll say, oh yeah, master said, you know what I mean? So there is a reason why,
Right. Well, that's a huge difference. That's the difference between expecting respect and earning respect. You give the information, like in that case, for instance, I have a friend who their girlfriend was from a different group. So he went to that group's batizado in plain clothes, sat in the audience to watch his girlfriend graduate. And so he gets to his class maybe 2 days later, and the teacher found out, and the teacher is all upset at him and cussing him out for having gone to a batizado for his girlfriend to watch her graduate. He didn't even participate. And it's like, that's just, there's no way to even justify that. But at the same time, to know that there are schools, there are places that you go where there may be beef, there may be issues. So you inform that person, maybe go with a friend, maybe go to one of their open events rather than visit the school on one of their internal holidays. Or maybe let me talk to the mestre over there and introduce you, so that they know that we know that you're going over there. And that, there's so many ways to have that be a dialogue rather than a dictatorial way of approaching things. I think you've clearly been able to demonstrate that difference, and I think that also, that gets into something that's a little bit stickier for us capoeiristas, and that is like what the boundaries are between teachers and students. Like for instance, in the US, there's a huge number of mestres who are married to their students, and in some cases they met their students separately outside of capoeira, and through them they got into capoeira, and in some cases they met them in capoeira, and in many cases these have been really good relationships. In other cases they haven't worked out so well, but one doesn't necessarily want to say what two consenting adults can and can't do. But at the same time, we do know that if something like that happened at a university, right? A professor is dating a student, and the professor is getting fired. If a doctor dates a client, then the doctor loses. Then if a doctor is dating a client, then the doctor is going to lose his license. Same with a therapist. So we have to really be able to look at that and say, sometimes these things happen, emotions happen, but we really need to at least be able to say that it is bad. It is not best practices to be dating your own students, and to just put that out there and have that be something that's understood. And when something like that happens, that then there can be a conversation about what that means for the relationship, what that means for the power within the power structure, how that can be harmful, and what are ways within that relationship structure to mitigate the harm. Because generally when those relationships break down, it's the student who ends up leaving the group. So you end up with people leaving your group, people not feeling welcome, people feeling like they may be the next commodity, depending on how people see that relationship develop. It can be really, really damaging to the group. But at the same time, it's hard to set that as a policy, because we don't have really any governing boards. We're all basically running our own businesses when we run a school. And so then how does that accountability come in? There are certain frameworks to look at that, but it's really difficult. What are your thoughts around that? And what's been in your experience?
Yeah, I think it's like you said, my family, I was born in a capoeira family. My partner I met in capoeira was my student, and I feel that it's a real fine line, right? Because when you have two consenting adults and they are straightforward with each other, right? And they both knows what the deal is, per se. It's understood, But I feel that the person who has more power, say the teacher, the master, is the one that has to be aware of not using that position as leverage or as a way to coerce the other one if things don't go the other way. Relationships, look, I feel that it's really important, because that what is capoeira is about building a community, right? So there is a vibe to it. There is, that attracts people. And at the same time, you don't, like in my own group, I don't want to make a environment where people feel like, the kind of look over the shoulder to is scared, you know what I mean? Or where, of course, everybody has to be accountable for their actions, but at the same time, you don't want to make like it should not be a work environment kind of thing, So it's important to know that relationships within the group can be tricky after the relationship breaks down, and how, so it's definitely complicated, but at the same time, it's something that I feel, say, in my group, I have a few branches. I don't feel like I should be the one dictating that you should not do this, right? Because I end up, I had a few
being the dictator again
with that. I you know what I mean? But it is important, I feel, to tell, like your instructors, like, look, and you are responsible for your actions, and you will be held accountable. And I think, when the article came out a few months ago, I had a series of conversations with different masters in capoeira, and they, from my understanding, I think only one that I spoke to that had like a code of conduct, for events. And the code of conduct was mostly saying this, like, look, in my event, you are my guest, but you will be held responsible for your actions, whatever they may be. And it's not just on, hitting on somebody, crossing the line, but also in a huddle, and say, look, if you send somebody to hospital, you will go to hospital with that guy, and I think it's just showing that, just telling people that they're gonna be held accountable. I think it really sometimes, because it's all about perspective, right?
Yeah.
And this is a perspective that a teacher, a young teacher, or maybe they won't see it, because it's like when I was in Brazil and there were things that I didn't realize until I moved out. Yeah, it's very hard to see when you are there, which sounds kind of silly, but it is true, because that's how it happens. People don't fully sometimes see what the action, not that they are childish or anything. It's just from your point, your position of power, and I think that just by letting them know, the penny drops, and you can have, oh, okay, so I have, which is obvious, it's kind of, but because of the environment of, when you are in the tour of events, it's always the same, schedule. You go there, you train, and you are, the center of attention. Then there will be a party, and, there'll be drinks and everything. So it's natural that, things happen. Well, when I mean things, I mean like, flirting and that kind of thing, which I think it is part. But what I feel that is super important is that people should know, like, don't cross the line, and just that warning, it makes a big difference. But also, this reminds me of a point which I said earlier on off with you, which is, it has a lot to do with the culture of bullying, and I came to the UK when I was 14, first time. My father came for a master's. That's when the group in the UK started. And I had, on the third day of school, I had somebody who wanted to beat me up for whatever reason, and, that was like North, Newcastle, and the guy was tough, and I remember I was worried, because there was a whole culture of fighting. And if the guy said, if you fight that guy, his cousin's gonna come. And I was worried. But I remember the teacher telling me, actually the head teacher at the time, and I spoke to her. I said, look, I'm a bit concerned that this guy is gonna beat me up. And she looked me in my eyes and said, if he hits you, you hit him back. Which is something that you're never gonna hear today in the school today, right? Like but I felt reinforced in the sense, basically what she was saying, like, stand up for yourself, and that was 1990, right? And I feel that if you look at the bullying issue, if you look from 1990 to today, it has not got better. Or maybe people are looking more, but I feel that it's really important to make bullying unacceptable. Just like drink and drive is unacceptable. Mm-hmm. And you have to tell first the victim, like, look, you need to stand up for yourself. It doesn't mean that you need to be physical, but you need to tell them. And also, if you tell the community, like, look, you guys, because 90% of the bullying happens behind the teacher, right? So if you make that truly not acceptable, like everybody's issue, if this happens, I feel that it's where the change comes in my opinion. So I feel that, because when we're talking about code of conduct, we also start talking about safety officers, which, by the way, I think we need to have a better name, because it feels very stiff,
Someone in my group came up with the name vibe checkers, and that's just the idea that you're the folks who are at the party to make sure that the vibe is good and that everybody's having a good time, and so it becomes less of the policing and more just making sure that everybody's having a good time, that everybody's working together to not make other people's times not good. So I'm going to start using that term.
And I feel that, like, because we start thinking, oh, maybe we should have a few guys at the events that know about this. But I think that the more people that knows what can go wrong in an event, and be able to spot, like, possible issues, and learning how to act, but at the same time being cool, because it's like a party, right? Like, how do you diffuse a situation? How do you spot when somebody can be vulnerable? How you can avoid situations where things can go, and I feel that we really got to look into what capoeira has taught me. Like, you got to play according to the music, but you need to know where that game is going. You know, you gotta read the guy you're playing, and I feel is the same we should do as, you know, because like you're saying, like code of conduct, I am not aware of many groups that have that, but I'm sure that now there is a lot of guys talking about this, but I feel that people like this is also what the feedback, like speaking to my students and a few of my female students, they told me this, like, oh, at the same, like, of course it's important to have this mechanism to minimize the chance of things going wrong, but at the same time you don't want it to make it like, you know, so stiff. Like, say for example, I have a small group here in Cambridge, and comes in, if we put the system of implement the system of a safety officer, how are you gonna get this conversation going to a brand new student? Oh, you know, we have like 8 people trained. This is, you know what I mean? Like we have to, you know what I mean? How to make it like, yeah, it's a tough, you know what I mean? Like how you show this without feeling weird, or, you know what I mean? Like, or without freaking out the new student, like, whoa, why you guys have this? Like, is that, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but I think that's also, like, I mean, part of just looking at, again, the approach of understanding what capoeira is. And, you know, anytime you know, you start a new job or you go to a new school, there are going to be these HR forms that tell you, you know, what's good, what's not good, how to spot an issue. One of the things we've started are some community accountability trainings that are open to everybody. So not only is it just you know, a certain set of teachers who are quote unquote safety officers, but everybody is read in, so everybody is able to participate. And it doesn't have to become something that's hierarchical necessarily, but that, you know, like you said, as long as everybody understands this, everybody is almost deputized to be able to intervene and be able to help people out, then it becomes more of a community effort, and it shifts the culture of the entire community. I think one of my approaches tends to be to work from a sex positive framework, because you're not going to stop things from happening, but there are ways to have the conversations that allow us to mitigate issues. One of the things you earlier said was, you know, being upfront, being able to, you know, a lot of times we travel to an event, we've been there for a week, we've spent time with somebody, they're feeling us, we're feeling them, we're single, they're single, and we talk about that, and we're able to spend time getting to know each other in that context. But a lot of times when that happens, a person maybe has a partner, or they're married, and in some cases that marriage is an open marriage, or there's an understanding, or the people are poly, or what have you. But much of the time it's not. And so then there's a lot of hiding, there's a lot of lying, and people don't really know what they're getting into when they hook up with somebody. And I wouldn't ever dream to say, okay, in these parties it's illegal to hook up, but to just talk about the fact that we should be able to be upfront with the people who we're meeting, and respect that person's right to know what they're getting into. And that's, again, especially when there's a teacher and somebody who's lower in rank, it's just that much more essential that happens. And I think that kind of, you know, as we have to kind of circle back and almost wrap it up fairly soon, that brings us back to kind of the whole concept of community accountability, because, you know, we can have vibe checkers, and we can have teachers who are watching out for people, but we also have to have some kind of process where if something does go wrong, or if something, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean that something has to be wrong, but we can see a pattern developing in someone's behavior where we're like, I'm not quite sure about that, maybe I should talk to somebody, so that we can pull that person aside and just talk to them and see how maybe their actions are being perceived. They may have one intent, but the way that it's landing to people is not as funny as they thought it was, or is not as fun as they thought it was. And to be able to have that. So a process of getting folks together to create community accountability, in the same way that that we did with your school, and that a lot of other schools have done, where both teachers and students who know about a certain issue are able to sit down and talk about it. We're able to look at how the person who was hurt was affected, and we're able to indicate that to the person who did the thing. Not saying that that person has to be punished or exiled from the community, but that we're giving that person an opportunity to be accountable, to hold themselves accountable, and to say, oh, that's not at all what I meant by my actions, and I really want to do what I can to make things better for the person who was hurt by my actions. Because I think that if we're all able to think in that way, then we can all see these. It's just like taking a rasteira in the roda, right? You know, it's going to hurt when you hit the ground, but it's a lesson, and it allows you to progress and move forward. And so accountability is that same type of lesson, where we have to learn not to be deflective, not to be defensive, not to say, oh, I didn't do that, or, you know, or that's not what I meant, so that person's accusations are invalid, but that's not what I meant. And so I need to find out how to make things better for that person. And it's a complete, you know, shift night and day. And we saw it in this instance, when a person was able to be like, yeah, I did that. That's not what I meant. And I definitely, you know, would never want somebody to go through what that person experienced from me. So how do I go about apologizing? How do I go about making things better? So creating that, both procedures and structures, but also just having the conversation over and over again, makes it part of the culture. And so that last aspect of community accountability then really makes everything else
the key is, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you just got up. Yeah, I think that the key is make it part of the culture. You know, I think is something that is not as present as it is. You know, it's not as constant as it should be. But I just wanted to ask you. You said about sex positive. Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you could explain that term.
Oh yeah, sure. So, for instance, and you know, you'll find it, the way that we look at sex, especially in the United States, to be very much from a puritanical point of view. So, you know, sex is marketed and sold, but in actuality, when we're talking about performing the act, or how we make the act better, or how we make sexual relationships better, we're afraid to even have that conversation. And there's a lot of shame. There's a lot of, oh, don't talk about that out in the open. And so we have a very negative attitude when it comes to sex. But if we look at things in a sex positive way, then we create space to talk about sex openly, to talk about the types of relationships that we have, to talk about you know, all the things that we do in order to enjoy ourselves and to create enjoyment and pleasure for other people. And that also means that we can have the conversations about safety, and about consent, about what feels good, what doesn't feel good, in an open way. And so that there are no surprises, there are no, you know, oh, I didn't realize that she didn't want that, or I didn't realize that he didn't want that, or that he wasn't. Because now, if we're in a sex positive culture, we're able to speak openly about that and not be afraid of being shut down, or not be afraid of being seen as a freak or what have you. So it's just that shift in culture, removing the shame.
I agree, and I feel like, looking from the side of, being the leader of my group, is that is super important to have this more regularly. It's also like, because there are number of things that can happen, right? Can happen some misunderstanding, or being slightly upset, but also can happen somebody who is been doing this for a while, who's been abusing the position constantly, and so I feel that it is this reinforcement to the student, and saying, look, we're going to have an event, just to be able to have this conversation, like I said, and there will be some guests and stuff, but like, don't, like I said, don't swallow a frog for anyone, don't take shit from anyone, and you will have these guys that you can go into if I'm not there, and because there was a number of don't really need to name names, but there was a situation that was this: a person who was going to lots of events, and it wasn't talked about, people. And then when it came out, it was amazing. It was the number of issues that had happened, and so I feel that it's really important to reinforce the lowest, in the hierarchical structure, to say, like, look, if there is anything, I think it's super important to show as a group that we are open to whatever you felt that was out of line. Sometimes it might not be anything. Sometimes people might not like, oh, this, it can be something minor, but sometimes can be something massive. So I think it's finding the way to have this conversation without, feeling a bit weird. I guess, like, even me talking this, over to you, it's not something that I have done, but I feel that it is a conversation that is important to have, and that should have more of these,
Yeah.
Yeah. We have a few people watching this now, and we will have, more people watching this later. And I would like to hear the feedback, and suggestions or questions. And I think we could work in a future one. We could have another conversation of this, or even having other guests. But I feel that we need to, it's something that we need to keep having those difficult conversations.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it would be cool if we, as folks are listening to us and have ideas or questions or answers, leave comments, leave questions, and then we could have another broadcast where we address those, or have those as part of the discussion, and maybe even bring some of those folks into the room, and because, again, we're not, we have some expertise because we're teachers of capoeira. I also have expertise because I'm a mental health professional, but we also need to bring other voices in, and this is kind of what it's all about. Just as you were saying, we've got to make sure that whoever is the lowest on the totem pole, quote unquote, feels empowered to speak their truth to the highest and hold us accountable. So that would be awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, man. So thank you very much for taking this time, and just be there and put your time out. I think it's something that we need as a community. We need to be talking more, and it would be great to pick it up from listening, watching us, and do leave your comments, your feedback there, and we'll pick it up from there for next time, and we can set soon another episode of this. So
great. I've always wanted to do this because I don't regularly do things online like this. But if you're out there and you've enjoyed this content, then please give a like and follow the Senzala podcast, and set that alert button so that you'll see the next time a new podcast comes out, and we will be talking with you later.
Cool. And yeah, if you are in the US, in California, is that the 13th?
The 20th, the 20th.
20th. So on 20th of November is going to be the formatura of Versátil, Mestre Versátil. And yeah, man, all the best. I hope you stepping up to the training. I heard there's a lot of people coming. The hot is going to be a long, like a long line of guests. Is anybody else getting formatura with you? Or
yeah, myself, my cousin Mestra Mia Velha, Mestre Xingu, Mestre Girafa,
Minha velha, nice.
Contramestre Raposa, Contramestre Javan, I think Contramestre Pezão. They're gonna be a few.
So. Okay, so there's a few to share the burden. That's man. All the best, congratulations, and we'll be in touch.